Right, good afternoon, everybody. Excellent, the mics are on. And welcome to this session in the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority Pavilion. It's fantastic to see you all here. And I have to say, I think we've got the best programme name of every talk, Hunting for Unicorns. I mean, what's not to love about that? I think we have a slight tendency to assume everybody knows what a unicorn is and why they are desirable. But I'll very quickly set the scene. So 24 businesses born in Cambridge have achieved the semi-mythical $1 billion valuation unicorn status. And the region has very ambitious plans to produce more. This panel session is going to explore our region's secret sauce for success, our plans for more, and what that means for the supply chains in the wider region. Now, unicorns are not just nice to have statistics. They bring real benefit to the local economy in terms of jobs, supply chain opportunities. So in terms of jobs, the unicorns have collectively supported more than 555,000 jobs as of 2023. And on average, these jobs were found to be highly productive, which, as we know, is a slight challenge for the UK economy. And they produce an average of £97,000 in value per job for the UK economy. So it's no wonder that the central government is interested in helping us to deliver more unicorns. We boost the local economy. It brings global recognition to our region. It helps with infrastructure development by attracting investment, global recognition, workforce talent, and education pipelines. And this rapidly increases the rate of infrastructure development in the surrounding region. We also provide inspiration and transformation. And we are very keen to work collaboratively in partnership with other regions. And in 2023, Manchester and Cambridge announced a very significant collaboration aiming to leverage their combined strengths and to fuel the growth of startups, attracting investment and fostering inclusive economic development. So that's the general scene for our panel. I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce four people that I actually know really well. And I'm going to invite each of my panellists to introduce themselves, because they will do it far better than me, and to tell you a little bit in a couple of minutes each of their initial thoughts, and then we'll proceed to some questions to tease it out in more detail. So, Uday, can we start with you, please?
So, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. So, thanks, Jane. My name is Uday Phadke. I've been part of the Cambridge ecosystem for a long time now, 25, 30 years, maybe even longer, according to my son. And the thing is, I've been involved in a variety of roles, everything from an academic role to being at the coalface in terms of working for large corporates, but also building quite a lot of startups. So in the spirit of trying to get proper debate going, Jane, I'm going to remind everybody here that the word unicorn in this context was first applied in 2013 by a venture capitalist called Eileen Lee, who in fact worked with me in California. So unicorns in this modern context are about 12 years old, right? And I think one of the big things about the strength of Cambridgeshire is that in order to create unicorns, you have to actually have other kinds of animals in the zoo as well, right? And in particular, in fact, I'm an author of a book called Camels, Tigers and Unicorns, which you can available on Amazon, which you can look up. But there are probably two other things worth just saying by way of introduction. Is that the idea of the unicorns is very, very focused on valuations, the billion-dollar valuation idea, and so it's really a one output metric. And having spent many years finding different ways to fail at business, I decided to run a big research program. So, and that's why this badge says Triple Chasm Company, because that model was actually built out of Cambridge, very closely working with the university. And that Triple Chasm model, basically, we looked at all the variables that drive growth. And there were 170 things we measured, and valuation is one of those. And in financial, in the investment area, we're really talking about one important metric amongst 50. And so the key message here is that don't just focus on the money. Focus on all the other things that you need in order to build an ecosystem and an infrastructure. And so that's one key message, which is a 360-degree view, which is why Cambridge has been so successful. The second is understanding the concept of maturity, because all businesses start with usually one or two people before they end up the people employing hundreds of other employees. And so we have this question of maturity, and the Triple Chasm refers to three chasms, three hurdles. So we have 24 unicorns in Cambridge over this period. We have thousands of early stage companies, which I would refer to as camels, because they go from oasis to oasis trying to find fresh money and resources. And then there are tigers, which do really well, but they have to operate in particular environments, right? And so that's probably all I should say at the moment. So there are some really good reasons why Cambridge has been successful. So our message to central government has to be, think about how you support the whole infrastructure and how you build the whole ecosystem.
Thank you. Dermot, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Jane. That's on, is it? Yeah, good. So my name is Diarmuid O'Brien. I'm the Pro Vice-Chancellor for Innovation at the University of Cambridge, which is a role that's very much focused on helping to create companies and impact from the research that takes place within the university. On the topic of unicorns, I mean, I would say the university is accountable for, give or take, about half of the unicorns that have come out of the broader Cambridge ecosystem. I mean, to me, I would say that, to pick up on what Uday's saying, he's correct, of course, to highlight that there are many factors beyond the valuation of a company that are important. But having said that, there's very few places, not just in the UK, but in Europe, that are able to build unicorn-valued businesses. So I would argue that if you can't build those businesses, then it probably means you've got missing infrastructure within your ecosystem that you really need to think about solving. In the case of Cambridge, we have been able to build them, and in fact, we've been able to build them at a rate that is leading in Europe, and of course, in context, leading in the UK. I would say the reason we've been able to do that is probably driven by four factors. The first is that most unicorn businesses have really differentiated intellectual property, really differentiated science or technology innovation that underpins them. And in Cambridge, we have a world-class research and innovation environment that allows us to truly do things that are different, that are unique, that help elevate what we can do. The second thing you need if you want to grow those kind of companies is you need real talent, and not just in the leadership that help to originate the idea, but in the team you build up around that idea that can implement. And again, we've got this huge attribute in Cambridge where we've got incredible talent that can come in and support the growth of these companies. The third factor you need is capital. And it's impossible to get really to £1 billion valuation of a business unless you're prepared to get people who are able to invest money to give you that valuation. We're very fortunate in Cambridge to have a pretty broad variety of venture capital. Not the perfect variety, and I think this is something we should come back to later when we think about what we can do better as an environment. But we have more venture capital and more variety of venture capital than most other places, again, in the UK and Europe. And finally, the last thing you need to do it, to build these companies, is you need a multifaceted innovation ecosystem. So yes, you need great research in the university, but you also need a large scale of early stage and scaling companies, because that's where you essentially borrow the talent from that grow these businesses. And you need large corporate companies who can also be customers or can also be sources of talent and partnership to help these businesses grow. And in the Cambridge Peterborough area now, we have 5,500 knowledge-intensive businesses within that area that provide the talent and the partnerships and the capability. So that combination of world-class research, of capital, of talent, and of a kind of mature ecosystem is what makes it possible in Cambridge. And I'll just finish on something that I'm sure we'll come back to later, but certainly the aspiration in Cambridge over the next decade is to try achieve the same level of unicorn growth as we did in the last 25 years. So to really scale up what we're doing that, and we have some very ambitious plans to try and achieve that.
Thank you, Dermot. Simon, can we have you up next, please?
It's me. I'm Simon Thorpe, delighted to be here. So I'm a humble business angel. I was the chair of Cambridge Angels. I also helped set up Manchester Angels, where I'm on the board. And I'm also a founding member of Angel Academy, which is a predominantly female angel network in London. I say predominantly, otherwise it wouldn't have some guys in it like me. So my as an angel, I've invested, I mean, here's a bit of context for you. I've invested in over 60 companies in the UK and across the world of many of the things you see on the board here, but basically across science and life sciences and technology. I've had 12 exits, 12 successful exits. I've had 12 failures, and I've got 30 plus companies in the portfolio. And my dream is for my companies to become unicorns. I haven't had a unicorn yet. I've had some soonicorns. So these are companies that have got close to $1 billion valuation, but might be in some cases at a somewhat lower valuation at the moment. But there's always hope. But we'll talk about this later. Why is it a dream to create a unicorn? It's not just, as Uday said, about just the valuation. It's about creating companies of real scale that make a real difference to the UK economy. And this is difficult. This is a hard thing to do because my 12 exits have all been companies that are sold essentially too early for the UK economy. Why didn't they stay in the UK? Why were they sold to Microsoft or Apple too early in their journey to become unicorns? So that's something we might want to return to. But I should have said something about animals. Probably I tend to pick up the animals when they're very newborn tigers, and my job is to try and tame them. But we'll come back to that maybe.
I must admit, I wasn't anticipating a whistle-stop tour around the local zoos. But it's good. I'm enjoying the journey. Lou, can we come to you next, please?
Thanks, Jane. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Louise Jopling, and I'm Chief Scientific and Innovation Officer at the Barbraham Research Campus. A number of you may not have heard of Barbraham, and we are one of the South Cambridge research campuses with, at the heart of it, an academic institute that has been there since just after the war, in fact. I'll bring in the animal piece because it was agriculturally focused back then to feed the nation as we came out of the war. But since the late 90s, it has been focused very much on human health. And at that point, in 1998, that was when to solve or to address market failure for early bioscience companies was to create bioincubation space. And no sooner had they created that out of a converted cowshed, 4 companies moved in, it was full. And so over the last almost 30 years, the campus has grown and evolved to start to feed that hopper of the future unicorns in biotechnology, focusing around protein production, antibody production, and cellular platforms, stem cell biology in particular, to really incubate, start, grow, and scale those companies. And for those that have scaled over that period of time, and we have 60 companies on campus, from 2-person startups within our fully managed shared equipment facility through to 150 plus companies that have their own buildings tailor-made for themselves. And that really is the Barbraham sweet spot in our how we can support those unicorns to then, when they get even larger, they can move into larger space, but they will have to leave our campus. And just bringing it back to the unicorn and some of the points that were just touched on, we had Kymab grow and scale came out of Sanger, but grow and scale on our campus and constantly evolve. And they reached their own particular inflection point, and they were acquired by Sanofi a few years ago, 2021. That announcement was made with a deal and milestones of about 1.4 billion. That was one great headline, but then the overarching impact for the talent that we had grown and cultivated on campus that can give back to our ecosystem. Sanofi, when they withdrew their R&D activities in the UK. Fortunately, we've been able to redeploy, re-energise and give back with the personnel that came from CREiiF, and many of those are going on to start their companies and their journeys, and we're working with them today to create that next unicorn that will fulfil the ambitions that Diarmuid referenced.
Thank you very much, Lou. So I think we've, between our 4 panellists, we've covered why Cambridge has been so successful in growing these unicorn companies, creating them in the first place as well. But I think I'd like to explore now what the panellists see as some of the opportunities for Cambridgeshire and the Peterborough region to capitalise on that successful history and enable the next generation of high-value startups. Where shall we start? Uday, I'm going to pick on you. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I'd like to pick up on something Diarmuid talked about, which is the core of everything is deep differentiation based on some science or technology. And I think that's been Cambridge's great strength. Very deep science, very deep technology, real intellectual property, which enables you to have high evaluations and support growth. And so my personal view is that if we focus our efforts on the 4 or 5 critical areas in terms of science and enabling science and technology, then that's a very good place to start. And we already have a great start in life sciences, the work that Barbraham and others are doing. So healthcare and life sciences is one. There's another area which is around agri-tech, agri-food. And again, we have great strengths in the region as a whole. The third area is actually around the changing view of defense and security and cyber and everything else. Again, very strong strengths. So there's the sort of 3 focused areas where I think Cambridge can actually build on. I could go on, but I think I should...
Thank you. Diarmuid, what's the university perspective on that, please?
Yeah, well, I think to really be ambitious about the future, there's probably 3 areas that I would like to see significant intervention. The first is around capital. So as I mentioned earlier, Cambridge has reasonable levels of capital compared to other parts of the UK or Europe. But compared to what you see in East and West Coast US, we're probably a factor of 5 or a factor of 10 below what we'd expect to get to. There's a huge amount of progress being made, at least in theory. The government is pushing what's called the Mansion House Compact, which is about unlocking institutional capital to invest in UK business. I think if we could get that moving over the next couple of years, we will have the firepower to really support the creation of unicorn businesses. The second thing is around talent. I think one of the huge factors that people are perhaps not understanding is that the investment in PhD training is directly correlated with the creation of these high-value businesses. And what we're seeing in the UK at the moment is a reduction in PhD funding, a reduction in the amount of PhDs that are going through our universities. In the case of Cambridge, it's down about 20% on what it was about 5 years ago. When you look at a lot of the unicorn companies that have come out, people like Tony Coseritos, an international PhD who came to Cambridge, people like Herman Hauser, international PhD who came to Cambridge, and so on and so forth. So what we're seeing is that if we don't have the PhDs, we won't be able to attract the global talent. And the absence of that global talent will reduce our capacity to produce the companies of the future. So I think that's the second thing that we really need to think about. And the third thing is about infrastructure. The rest of the world's got really organized about how they support innovation, and they're connecting their innovation assets in their cities and in their geographies to make sure that you are reducing the friction, reducing the challenges to creating new businesses. We have a very ambitious ambition for Cambridge, which is to build a globally competitive innovation hub that will house early and scaling companies along with corporates and corporate innovation teams. We have an incredible site in the centre of the city that's ready to go, and I hope post the spending review we'll be announcing immediate plans to deliver that. But that kind of infrastructure that provides that shared lab infrastructure, that environment to coalesce and build scale of companies is going to be hugely differentiating in terms of our capacity to build those companies into the future. So that'd be the 3 things that I would really like to kind of point out that we need to deal with to really meet the ambition.
Thank you, Dermot. Lou, I'm going to come to you next, just to keep everyone on their toes. Is your experience at the Barbraham, you seeing similar challenges to the ones that Dermot has outlined there on the talent side?
Yeah, absolutely. And across our campus, so we are the Barbraham Institute in particular, but a freeholder of the 430 acres that we sit on is BBSRC, and they have some very creative mechanisms to encourage that PhD program, so very much an industry secondee approach, and it makes it actually a very cost-effective way for companies to be able to support that talent development. But for our very, very early stage companies, they may not be around in 4 years' time, given the current financial climate. So again, we're trying to find creative ways on the campus to really support a number of companies to input to that development of the student without the student suffering as well. So it's very much that physical and human capital I definitely see. But one of the things, and I really like, Dermot bringing around the innovation hub, and obviously, we see Barbraham as well as many of the other parks and campuses in our region to enable that, support that, fuel that, all those to be, to fuel out their growth on our campuses. But I just wanted to bring another, what I think is a really important consortium programme. This is led out of UKREiiF funding, called Cambridge NeuroWorks, that is a Cambridge-wide consortium. So in Cambridge, we're very collegiate, very collaborative, and this is another example of that. And this is in the space of neurotechnology, and it is really trying to build the talent that are going to create those breakthrough solutions for all forms of neurological disorder. We're deliberately not defining what neurotechnology is or what indications it needs to address, because otherwise that's going to constrain these breakthrough solutions. And this is to break down traditional silos between disciplines, whether that's the physical sciences. The west of Cambridge is particularly, but not exclusively, but particularly strong in the engineering. So get that engineering as well as the biological sciences at the Milner Institute, on the biomedical campus and with ourselves. And the clinical as well as the industrial partners to really just all come together with this single goal in mind, so that we can really supercharge, in that particular instance, new solutions for patients, not just for Cambridge, not just for the UK, but for global impact as quickly as possible. So I think it's just started. So I'm really excited for what the next 2.5 years will look like for that, and how that can sort of be a catalyst for unlocking some other creative funding mechanisms as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. Lou. I've known you for years. Why did I get that wrong? So I'm really glad that you've referenced the impact and given some real-world examples, because I think talking about unicorns can sound a bit vague, generic, impersonal, but to actually be aware of some of the real-world issues that we're solving, be they technological issues, be they climate change, be they life science and healthcare, it brings it down to a grounded level and makes us realise just how important these companies are to society and what they do, as well as in the economic value that they bring to the UK economy. Several of the speakers have touched on the challenges at the moment in the investment landscape, and I'd now like to turn to Simon and see if you could give us an updated perspective based on both on the state of investment, but also some of the steps the government is proposing.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, so one thing perhaps we should, in preparation for this panel, I was looking up how many unicorns there were in the UK, and ChatGPT will tell you there are 88. I don't think the number is 88. It's a little less than that, because some of the names on the list are not actually unicorns, or they've been acquired. But I mean, I think that just emphasises that Cambridge with 24 has got more than a quarter of the UK's unicorns. And I think we need to understand, when you're looking at what you can do better, you look at your successes and you say, what actually contributed to that success? How do we repeat that success in other regions around the UK? How do we repeat it more regularly in Cambridge? Now Dermot's covered some of the points that we'd like to think about. One of the other points I'd add to it is connections. A lot of entrepreneurs come to me and they're not connected really at all. And one of the first things I do to try and get them to do is to connect with people so that they actually do have the right connections to grow their business. I had an example yesterday, which I actually mentioned this morning, where Manchester Angels introduced me to a company because they thought I was the right person. I wasn't the right person, but I was able to say to the entrepreneur, look, here is the right person you need to talk to. And there's a lot of that going on, and that's a really important part of the thing. Probably something else I should say in terms of, before answering your question, Jane, in terms of as an angel, when I'm actually evaluating companies, and I see, with Cambridge Angels, we see probably 1,300 pitch decks a year. It's a lot of pitch decks. We probably take proper presentations from 70 of those, and we'll probably invest in 15 new companies each year. So you can see there's a big hopper, and there's only a very small number of companies that get investment. But we can generally tell in 10 minutes whether a team, 2 entrepreneurs, which is typically 2 founders, we can tell in 10 minutes whether really they've got something. And so we're looking at the team. The team dynamics are absolutely critical, because if the 2 people aren't right at the beginning, they're unlikely to be able to grow a company of 100, 200, 300 people. They've got to be of a certain type. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they've got to, Uday talked about this earlier, they've got to have some genuinely differentiated tech. There's got to be some strong IP, and that's obviously what Cambridge has been particularly good at. Very R&D intensive, very focused on IP. And if you think about the world now, where we're largely investing in intangible assets, we're not investing in bricks and mortar anymore, we're investing in intangible things, most of them in the digital world. So that's very important. And the last thing, there has to be a big market. So I think of one of my successful exits was a company called SwiftKey, which was sold to Microsoft. We had the CEO in Cambridge with us last night, who was talking to us. When they sold that business, they were a global business. They became a global business almost immediately. They weren't thinking about the UK market. They were thinking about the global market from the word go. And a lot of venture capitalists will say to companies, you need to go straight to America, not just for funding, but for your business. You need to enter the US market. It's absolutely critical. So those are some of the things. In terms of what would I say to government, well, government really needs to understand what actually driving growth is. And sadly, I don't think they really do. And I'm going to be controversial here. I think most of the politicians don't have a science and tech background. So it's very difficult to get them to really understand. There are some very good exceptions to this, of course, but they don't really understand what it takes to really grow a business and talk about building more scale-up companies.
Thank you. So we're touching gently on the role of the private sector of investment generally, but also the public sector. And I'd like to tease that out a little bit more in that, Innovate Cambridge, I'm delighted to see Catherine Chapman in the room here as the Executive Director of Innovate Cambridge. You've outlined plans to double the number of unicorn companies in the region. What is the role of public and private sector organisations in achieving this and delivering it? Diarmuid, could I start with you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Innovate Cambridge did set that goal, and it also set a kind of 3-pronged strategy to try and deliver that. So the first element of that strategy was around making sure the innovation environment is firing on all cylinders, and that is really a public-private partnership. I mean, one of the great things that Innovate Cambridge has done is it brought together the full collection of all stakeholders needed to make that work. So that's local government, national government, it's large industry, it's investors, it's property developers, it's incubators, accelerators, it's the networks, etc. And so we worked very hard to build a kind of consensus and aligned vision as to what we're trying to do. And what that boils down to, though, is really what I talked about earlier. It's the capital, and it's the talent, and it's the research and innovation environment. So clearly, both government and private sector have a role to play in on all 3 of those elements. The second piece was about trying to ensure that we developed an inclusive innovation agenda for the city. This is really critical because building unicorn businesses is obviously a great achievement for those involved, but if it doesn't provide economic opportunity for those who are living and working in that city, it actually creates as many challenges as successes that it achieves, because it results in all the things we're familiar with, which is house prices going up, traffic congestion within the city, difficulty in finding school places, difficulty in finding GP appointment times, all the kind of things that come from a city that is growing but not putting in place the kind of infrastructure it needs to support it. And what we're really trying to do with Innovate Cambridge is to ensure that we build an inclusive mindset to the innovation development of the city. And so we think not about building houses, but of building communities and the infrastructure that's needed to do that. We think about ensuring we are looking at a range of different skills and talent that are needed across the city, so that there's employment opportunity for not just those with PhDs, but those right across the skills and technical spectrum. And that those who are benefiting from the economic returns of the innovation and growth are committed to giving back to the city. And we created something called the Cambridge Pledge, which is, the city created something called the Cambridge Pledge, which we're supporting to give back to that. The third piece is around partnership. Cambridge is small. Cambridge Peterborough is small collectively. And if we want to really deliver the full potential of the region, we do need to think about how we connect. Obviously, there's the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, which is something that we are committed to supporting. There's the plans for the Manchester partnership, which was spoken about this morning. And so this is all about finding ways to scale our network, to scale our sources of capital, to scale our sources of talent, and to hopefully find ways to share the economic upside right across the regions, both within our own region and beyond. And that really also requires that public-private support to do it. So I think across all of those areas, to deliver on the vision, it really requires that joined-up approach between national government, local government, and the businesses within the area, which is what makes it hard. But I think it also means that if it's hard for us, it's hard for others. And if we can get aligned and do that, we've real competitive advantage which we can deliver and gain from. So that's the approach that we're taking in Innovate Cambridge at the moment.
Thank you very much, Dermot. So you mentioned that Cambridge is a small city, and despite that, we were ranked as the world's leading science and technology cluster for the third year running in 2024. But it's not always an assumption that just because a company is founded in Cambridge and has the benefit of this remarkable connected city of people who just talk all the time and have real experience, but not every company will succeed. And Uday, I wonder if you could just give us a little tour on what you see as the major current barriers for growth and success for those startup companies.
So if I actually link that back to the previous question you asked about public versus private investment, I think we have a challenge at the moment, and I think Simon's also referred to how much the government understands this. There's this idea of crowding in investment that's being promoted by Rachel Reeves and her team, and the idea is a partnership between public funding and private funding, and I think that getting that balance right is really important. But it means understanding the nature of risk. And I think it's fundamentally, any investor wants to mitigate risk. And so that's why you have state grant funding, etc., because the risk is much higher. Funding PhD students, very early stage, you're not going to find any private investors generally wanting to invest in PhD students. So it's fundamentally about risk mitigation is what really matters. And I think that's the key. I feel this very strongly because we've been doing a lot of work and trying to understand how we can turn things like the Mansion House Accord into something tangible as opposed to some nice PR. And I think the thing there is that we need to understand better what impact we're creating. This is a return on investment. And I think if you look at so to come back to your question about earlier stage, I think Lou's already referred to the potential coming risk in terms of lack of funding for startups and early. So we've got to do that, because if we take our eye off the ball there, then we're going to damage the seed corn. But I think we need more pull through, and that's why I'm kind of one of these people who says great, let's measure the number of unicorns we have. But actually, I would like to see a lot of mid-sized companies, some of which can then become unicorns. And I think we have a big gap around what I call Chasm 2, which is mid-sized companies which are actually gone beyond the startup phase, and they may not all necessarily be worth $1 billion, but they could be worth 300 million or 400 million or 500 million. And I think that's where I think we need to focus our energy.
So we really need to consider the whole range of company sizes and opportunities within the economy locally. Lou, one of the questions that I come up against a lot is when people talk to me about government investment and wanting to see very quick returns on investment and on grants that are granted these innovative companies. But life science doesn't always grow at pace. It can take years, decades even, to reach proof of concept and bring a product to market, particularly in the regulatory environment. Do you see that as a blockage to our achieving our additional 23, 24 unicorns in a decade?
So from a life sciences perspective, and I will bring it back to a previous role that I had where I was working across the spectrum of health technology. But yeah, and at the moment we are seeing companies that are going into the clinic, fantastic marker of success. However, because of the funding environment, they've got a lovely discovery pipeline coming up behind that. But the investors, they're saying, you cannot do it all. Focus on that clinical asset, because if that does not succeed, that's the proof of your whole platform, your approach. And so that's creating some real tensions, as you can imagine. And you know, I'm already in my mind feeling that if in the time in which those clinical trials read out, if the funds don't come through for those companies, should that trial succeed, which we all hope it does, particularly for patients, then that company is probably going to be acquired by, one of my previous employers. If it fails, then what happens to everything that company has been working on? So that's in the back of my mind, particularly in the life sciences approach. But I think just obviously many of the companies that we support and on Barbraham Research Campus, but also through our Accelerate at Barbraham programme, is looking very much at that Chasm 1 that Uday referred to. But I have worked across health tech with companies at that Chasm 2 phase, and we've taken them through that methodology and really seen, as they've come out the other side, a real pivot of their commercial model to succeed with securing significant investment, but going in a completely different market space rather than going to trust by trust or healthcare system by healthcare system to, okay, we'll be on the catalogue of opportunities that a CRO is going to offer out to big pharma in their clinical trials, for example, and that's really yielded success for them. I think I do want to bring it back to a sort of a beyond Cambridge and Peterborough, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough as well. I've worked across the whole of the east of England in the past in the context of working with the regional NHS system. And what I want to see to truly enable some of our local companies is truly accessible data sets and integrated data across the continuum of care. I know there are national programs for the secure data environments. This needs to be supercharged to really help companies drive real-world health impact to inform their businesses, as well as supporting the communities that then those therapies, technologies go out to serve. And that, if we can do that in each of the 7 NHS regions, that is going to really supercharge for human health and to stop this, what has Cambridge done for Great Yarmouth or for wherever, whichever other city. So I'm gonna pause there. I've got many more things I could bring out if you
Brilliant.
wish.
Thanks, Lou. And just to warn you, I'll be opening the floor up any minute now to questions, so please start thinking about your questions for our fabulous panel. It's been very interesting hearing the different roles of government and private institutions in helping us to achieve this growth, which will contribute to the region and indeed to the UK economy. Simon, a last question for you. You were nodding ardently while Lou was speaking, and I just wonder, are there companies that private investors simply don't want to invest in because of the long returns? Thinking about the role of patient capital here. Is that where government should step in?
Well, I think firstly, Lou's obviously been talking about life sciences, but essentially you can apply the same time frames to most of tech, with the exception of software. So, but if we're talking about semiconductors, quantum computing, some of these things have got very long time frames. So there's kind of 10 to 15 years. So if I'm investing for the first time in a company, getting to my age, I'm thinking, am I still going to be alive by the time the company exits? Or am I going to be passing this investment on to my children? So you've got to be thinking like that. But software is typically got a shorter time frame. It's typically less capital intensive. But there are certain industries that are very difficult to invest in without the support of the underlying buyer. So Lou's mentioned the NHS. The NHS is often, when companies say, well, we're going to go and target the NHS as our first customer, and the investors go, oh, no. And it's kind of the same with the MOD, because we don't have that sort of infrastructure. And this is where we can learn from America, especially in defence and intelligence and in that world. And we're having to learn pretty fast at the moment. The universities are having to change their tune about this, because they'd always say, well, we don't want to invest in anything pointy. And now they're having to change their tune, because we're rapidly having to wake up the fact we're going to have to spend much greater proportion of our GDP on defence. But we can learn from America, because they create a supportive infrastructure for their companies, so they don't let their best early stage tech companies fail. They support them. If they promise them business, they give them the business, and then they actually pay them. We have a habit of stringing our companies along and not saying we want all this work done, but then actually not paying for it, and that's a disaster for not just the company, but it's a disaster for the UK. So those are some of the things. I should say, by the way, we haven't mentioned Innovate UK, for example. I mean, Innovate UK is a very important part of the UK public sector initiative for all companies. And when I'm investing in companies, if they're not talking to Innovate UK, I'm going to be asking why. So, and that body is changing at the moment. They're reevaluating their strategy. That's very much a live issue. But Innovate UK and R&D tax credits, these are things that are very important for the UK ecosystem.
Lovely, thank you very much. Right, audience participation time. Brilliant, I can see some hands. There is a roving mic and there's quite a lot of background noise, so if you'd use the mic and hold it close to your mouth, that would be much appreciated. Yes, please.
Fantastic. James Curtis from Morgan Sindall. 2 questions, because I'm a bit greedy. One of them is quite quick. I think the data from last year showed that new company starts was down. Should we be worried about that? And then sort of second part, going back to the animal metaphor, in the last however many years, a lot of the kind of major international tech companies and pharma have moved into Cambridge. Are they the crocodiles at the Oasis snapping at the camels?
He's looking at me as he said that. So, yeah, there's a lot of animals in the jungle, and even crocodiles can be useful, right? Depending on how you harness them. So I think that you just have to accept it's a vibrant ecosystem. So agility is the key thing here, agile responses. And that's why some of the things Simon's talking about with relation to government are a bit of a challenge at the moment. When Innovate UK has spent best part of 6 months figuring out where their priorities are going to sit, may not be their fault. But so we have the speed of response. I don't think we can carry on slow and steady everything. But that then points to the fact that you pick markets where there are some important structural changes going on which level the playing field. So in healthcare, 10, 12 years to develop new therapies, etc. There are some fundamental structural changes going on in healthcare, which mean that smaller nations, more agile people, of which I hope we can be one, can actually take advantage of this. And when it comes to data, I spend a lot of my time trying to look at data, collect data, wearing my other hat with the R&D Society. and I can find you any piece of data that you want to support your argument. So I kind of put that slightly on the side. I think we're going to see these little fluctuations. I'm not too worried about that. Yeah.
Jane, can I comment?
Yes, please do.
Just on the startups, I mean, the venture capital market at the moment is just terrible. You know, there's a very, very limited venture capital out there. So it's not surprising that we're seeing a reduction in startups across the region. I mean, I think if that was counter-cyclical to what we were seeing in other parts of the country or Europe, then it'd be more concerning. Interestingly, the university produced more spin-outs last year than any other UK university, and indeed a record number from its own track record. The reason that happened is because the university is lucky enough to have separate capital to the venture market and is able to invest in some of those early stage companies. Now, whether those companies will get the capital to grow and scale as we think they have the potential to will be reliant on that market. But it just goes to show the importance of making sure we've got a diverse venture capital environment or capital investment environment that can support through these cycles, you know. So I wouldn't be worried about it, but I think we do need to track that we're keeping, that we're correlated to what's going on in the bigger market. Yeah.
Sorry, Jane, could I
chip in?
And just to come into that, what we found at Barbraham just recently is that for our very early bioincubation space, our live labs, we were full very, very quickly. So that's the sort of 2 to 4 person shared flexible rental model. And so we've now scaled that space. We're in 10,000 square foot where we can support now up to 35 companies. So that's fantastic because that's that sort of one end of the hopper. What I'm thinking is, first of all, enabling us to fill that space, which, touch wood, I don't think is going to be a problem. It is when we're full, then where do they go? And secondly, that is meant to be quite a sort of short-term journey. So when they create that data package, the inflection point, they then graduate and move into their own tenanted space, however small or large that is. My thinking is, or my assumptions are, that they will need that safety, that comfort zone for a little bit longer than we've historically needed to provide that. So again, that doesn't change the fact that we're going to have more, it will be full and nobody moving out the other end. So that's sort of one of the things that I'm holding in my mind. So we're not seeing a dearth of startups currently, but it's helping them get beyond that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, picking up on what Dermot said, very hard for VCs, venture capitalists, and that's why as angels we're now seeing more pitches than we did before, because then some of these companies are not going straight to a venture capitalist. They thought they could before, now they can't, so they come to angels. And I think we'll come to these poor humble angels, we'll grow with them for a bit, and then we'll find a VC when the market conditions have changed. So the numbers are definitely down.
Thank you, everybody. There was a question near the back as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Combo, I'm the elected leader at Huntingdonshire, so I'm going to ask you a sort of wider geographic question on behalf of all of us. Is there an opportunity for a growth space across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough that's beyond the city of Cambridge? And what are the things that enable that? And what are the right conditions for those unicorns, tigers, camels to thrive and grow?
Well, this is a great question, and it speaks to something we were talking about earlier. And it speaks to more unicorns. So my companies are all exiting too early to move outside the centre of Cambridge, because they're typically 20 or 30 people. But I want them to become a CMR Surgical or a Paragraph or a Pragmatic. These are the sort of companies, if they get to the sort of scale, then they're going to want to use the wider cluster. So the answer is, if we're going to successfully create more business in the cluster, we need more scale-ups, we need more unicorns.
Can I add to that, actually? I think that's absolutely right. And you talk about the broader picture. I think there's a need, there's an opportunity for areas outside the core of the city to provide some of the infrastructure capacity and services for these companies at scale. There really is. I think you're involved in something in the auto space. And I've been advocating for that, to say there is a need for commercializing all the smaller companies there, so we actually build something of scale. So absolutely, yes.
Dermot, do you want to speak a bit about the wider impact of the university generally?
Well, happy to. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, I think there's two parts to the university. I mean, we did an economic impact study 2 years ago, which looks at the university generating across the UK about 30 billion of economic impact annually. 23 billion of that was linked to research and research commercialisation. And we do see that not just being in the Cambridge area, and indeed not just in the local geography area, but across the UK. I don't remember the job numbers, but they're certainly in the tens of thousands across the UK that are linked to that number. The other piece I would say, though, is that the university is really beginning to waken up to its civic responsibilities and recognising, not just for Cambridge, but for the greater area, that we need to think about how we can support those who are not necessarily benefiting as directly as others from the university. And I think there's a changing understanding about what the role of a university is in shaping the broader environment in which it operates in. So I'd like to think that we'd be a trusted partner for that into the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. And any other contributions to that wider regional question? Have we covered it?
I could add one more thing,
Yeah.
which is that, with change comes opportunity. And on Tuesday in Manchester, I saw a group of people who were using innovation from the in silico space, the computing space, to try and transform the way in which regulation is handled in life sciences and healthcare, how clinical trials can be done in a different way. And I think it's things like that which straddle across in a multidisciplinary way. I think that could be a very powerful area. And therein lies a challenge, because if you're in the university, then your departmental focus tends to be narrow, as it is, because that's the area of scholarship. But I think there's something else horizontally that could be done very powerfully.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Oh, two, right.
Yeah, just want to find out, you mentioned about the VC funding has gone down rapidly, and then why is it the VC are not interested in this business or in investing, or is it because of the interest rates or any other reason? Thank you.
It's not due to lack of interest, it's due to lack of investors in the VC themselves. So the way that industry works is that venture capitalists make investors give money to venture capitalists, they invest that money, they get returns, they give it back to those investors, and they invest again. What's happening at the moment is that companies can't exit because there's no market for it, which means the capital the investors gave in is not getting recycled, which means when you're trying to raise more money, there's no capital to reinvest. And so it's just it's a structural issue that won't really get resolved until the markets improve and you begin to see company exits. And what that means is that essentially you're seeing the level of venture capital decline as the markets are not allowing exits, and there's probably a couple of more years left of difficult times before capital will flow again.
It's the same it's exactly the same phenomenon for angels like me. If I don't get an exit, then I can't recycle my capital into new startups.
Thank you. There was another question in the middle of the room. I think this will have to be our last one.
Thank you. My name's Ben Williams. I work for a construction company called Seven Formation. Dermot mentioned about the quantity of PhDs and the correlation between the number of unicorn businesses in an area. And you said about that there's less PhD funding available at the moment. I was just wondering what's kind of the cause of that at the moment.
It's really because government investment in research and innovation had broadly flatlined, and the costs of delivering research have been going up, and so there's just choices being made at government level as to where to put the money, and PhDs have been losing out in that sense. Also, large charities that used to fund PhDs in the space are not funding them anymore, which means that's another source of capital that's been gone that supports that. So I guess it's just two ways to think about this problem. One, we try and grow the research funding, obviously in an environment where there's a lot of fiscal constraints, that's pretty tough. The second is we balance how we're spending that money and reprioritise PhDs and PhD training, which I think is personally what I would be encouraging us to do. But there are a lot of, again, competing desires for how that funding should be used. So it all depends about whether you're investing for the future or investing for more immediate return today. PhDs is an investment for the future. And I think that's the problem at the moment, is people are looking for quick wins.
Thank you, Dermot. Right, so to move on to the concluding remarks of this session, we've had a whistle-stop tour. We've explored the region's, the benefits to the wider region of Cambridge's great success in innovating and in growing high-value businesses as a result of that innovation. So if I could just turn to each panellist in turn, starting with Uday, a very quick concluding remark from each of you, please.
So I knew I'd get the first question. So the thing I would say, if I was in summary, I would say this is not a time to be despondent. Really, we need to be very positive and embrace the opportunities in an agile way. So when you see R&D funding dropping off, number of PhDs, you see VCs struggling. To me, every problem is an opportunity. That's probably what I would say.
Thank you. Dermot.
Yeah, I guess I'd say Cambridge is better positioned than Cambridge and Peterborough, to be clear, is better positioned than anywhere else in the UK to grow unicorns into the future. There's nothing that's changed in the last number of years that has disadvantaged Cambridge, that has been producing more than anywhere else. And in fact, I would say it's the opposite. I think Cambridge is now more organised than it ever has. It's got more focus and conversation going with government than it's ever had. And it's got a clear, ambitious plan for the future. So I think there's a real opportunity. Despite the macro conditions being challenging, I think there's a huge opportunity for Cambridge right now.
Yeah, when I first really got involved with Cambridge, which was kind of about 15 years ago, I'd say to people in Cambridge, why doesn't anybody market this? Why doesn't anybody tell anybody about this? And they'd say, why would we want to do that, Simon? Now, as you can see, as Dermot says, Cambridge really has got its act together, and it is doing things like that. It is marketing Cambridge, and it is wanting to transfer knowledge to other parts of the UK, hence the Manchester partnership. So I've seen a great change in that time. This is a very positive development. I'm very positive about the opportunity, and I can see us doing more by building on the success that we've always had.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, and I too am feeling incredibly positive. I think the track record that Cambridge in particular has, we've got that blueprint. And to Dermot's point, if Cambridge can't do it, it's going to be even harder elsewhere. And so, I think with respect to some other initiatives, I alluded to our Cambridge NeuroWorks as just a start of really bringing together and breaking down the silos between some of the disciplines that have stayed in their swim lane in the past. And I think that's what I'm really excited about, is that potential of bringing those disciplines together even more so, rather than just talking the talk, we're walking the walk.
Thank you. I'm thrilled that we've ended on such a positive note. In the middle of challenging times. I have to say, my experience at Cambridge echoes that of the panel. It's a very positive place. There's a real sense of excitement. There's a real sense of drive. I think the clear message from today is it has to be inclusive drive for the whole region and the wider UK. So not just the unicorns that we've come hunting for this afternoon, but also the camels, the tigers, and of course the crocodiles snapping at our heels to keep us keen. So it just ends up with me to thank our four panellists, Uday, Dermot, Simon and Lou. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you this afternoon, hearing what you had to say. And thank you also to the audience for your attention.